My name is Azzati Aqilah Ahmad, and my presentation is about Gouda cheese production. This is the PFD of Gouda cheese production. Raw milk is pasteurized at 63 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, and it is cooled at 32 degrees Celsius. Starter culture LAB bacteria will be added, and red color CaCl2 will be added and mixed with the curd. Next, rennet is added at 35 degrees Celsius. After 30 minutes, the curd is cut. Water is added and stirred with the curd. Next, the curd is molded into a wooden mold for 2 hours. Then it will be soaked in brine to form the red layer of the cheese. It will be left to ripen up to 2 years in the storage room, and then it will be transported to the consumers and buyers. When renneting, it is important to gently stir the diluted rennet with up and down motion for at least 1 minute, and then it is covered and allowed to set for 60 minutes until a clean break is formed. Cutting the curds is described as the cheese making basics, and it is allowed to stand for 10 minutes to set. After draining the whey, the curds is allowed to stand for 15 minutes, and the cheese is lined in basket with the cheesecloth. Fill the cheese basket quickly with placing the warm curds into the lined cheese basket, breaking them as little as possible. Brine the cheese in a solution of salt and water. It is then allowed to air dry and ripen up to 2 years before transporting to the consumer. Hazards can be present in raw milk is lactobacillus species, Pseudomonas E. coli or Listeria monocytogenes, which can be pasteurized at 63 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, and chemicals were pesticides residue, heavy metals, or aflatoxin. Hazards in starter culture, which is moisture, humidity, or airborne elements, which can be fixed with adding cryoprotectant such as reconstituted skim milk plus lactose and freezing below -60 Celsius and stored at -20 and -40 and add buffer to maintain the pH, which is the CaCO2. Biological hazard that can be present in rennet is L. helveticus, S. thermophilus, Salmonella, L. monocytogenes, and coliforms. CCP is quickly used the curd to prevent prolonged time, which is only 30 minutes. In curd cutting, physical hazard might be present, which is metal and dust, which can be prevented by hygiene practice. The equipment must be sanitized. Biological hazard might be present in the wooden mold, which L. helveticus, Thermophilus, Salmonella, L. monocytogenes, or coliforms, and which can be prevented by quick handling and proper attire. It must be handled within 2 hours, and the workers must wear gloves, sanitized hand, apron, and healthy workers must perform. Dust or dirt can be present, which can be prevented by cleaning thoroughly using light soap solution and brush it off. In brine, there might be Enterobacteriaceae, which can be prevented by using efficient biocidal, for instance, peroxyacetic acid. And chemicals hazard is residues of chloride compounds. We must ensure enough soaking time, which is not prolonged after 2 hours. Biological hazards can be present when storing the cheese to ripe. Salmonella E. coli or S. aureus and Brucella spp can be present. To prevent, we must often clean the cheese. Sanitization and GHP practice must be used. Wipe the rack with thin soap layer and use glove or apron when handling. Pests can be present, which can be prevented by adequate condition for the storage, which is in a closed room at 13 degrees Celsius. Hazards can be present when transporting Escherichia coli, E. coli, S. aureus, Enterobacter aerogenes, Citrobacter, Klebsiella spp. and the temperature is around 5 to 8 degrees Celsius of transportation to avoid contamination. When conducting the zoning risk assessment, it is important to identify the potential cross-contamination between different processing environments or products. Categorization of zones at the plant includes the following control mechanism, which will be taken into consideration. First, usage of closed system, structural separation of respective area by design, raw or wet, dry environments, utilities control, air, water, air filters in the tank, crystallization tank if located outside. Control of traffic patterns of people, materials, supplies, flow, and equipment movement, internal transport, use of vestibule as entrance and exit with personal hygiene and changing measures. Sanitation also included. There are different levels of zoning. First is non-manufacturing zone, raw zone, control zone, and high hygiene zone. In raw zone, equipment are raw milk receiving tanks, pasteurizers, and balance tank, and the controls use dedicated employees and physical separation, which is wall from control zones. In the control zones, there are evaporators, spray dryer, and powder packing rooms. The controls are using general physical barrier checks, traffic control, utility control, GMP, which is to address risk and prevent cross-contamination. Third, in high control zone, there are cold filling tank, hot filling, and culture addition tank. Additionally, GMP protective clothing is used, more stringent sanitation and equipment design is used. Fourth, in non-manufacturing zones, there are office, cafeteria, locker room, laboratory, utilities, and etc. Controls using dedicated employees and physical separation, which is wall from control zones. In high hygiene zone, additional GMP practice such as captive footwear clothing may be required, and more stringent equipment building sanitary design are followed. Here are 10 principles of GMP. Here is the quality relationship. Routine cheese microbial analysis should include yeast and molds, total coliform, and staphylococci. For raw milk cheese, all vats must be tasted for presence of Salmonella, Staphylococci, Listeria, and anthropogenic E. coli. In chemical analysis, brine salted cheese have pronounced salt and moisture gradients, namely higher salt and lower moisture near the surface. Large blocks or wheels of pressed cheese will have moisture and pH gradients, increasing moisture and decreasing pH toward the interior. The blended cheese will be added with sodium citrate solution and blend until homogeneous. It is to use for further chemical analysis. Moving on to microbial analysis. Heat dilution blanks of sterile aqueous 2% sodium citrate to 40 degrees Celsius is used and blend to emulsify the cheese. Dilution will be pipetted into dilution blank. Percent of total solid equals to dry weight over wet weight, and percent of moisture is equal to 100 minus percent of total solids. Other than that, titratable acidity also used. It is to measure the acidity and pH. Sample is titrated with sodium hydroxide solution. Titratable acidity reported as percent lactic acid is dependent on the volume of sample. pH probe will measure only those H+ ions which are free in solution and undissociated with salts or protein. This is important because it is free H+ ion which modifies protein functionality and contributes sour taste. Fats in cheese also will be calculated. Culture activity test also included, which is to ensure the cheese culture have adequate activity before inoculating the cheese vat. The activity and amount of inoculum should be sufficient to produce a titratable acidity about 0.34% lactic acid, 10% reconstituted skim milk after 4 hours incubation at 37 degrees. Principles of quality assurance include wide-ranging concept covers of matters that individually or collectively influence the quality of products. Second, totality of arrangements, and third is QA incorporates GMP.